Well, ladies and gents, am I having a brilliant day or what? Obviously, we've not been able to get out fishing for, what, 6 or 7 weeks now? And I just fancied, for my first trip back out, going somewhere picturesque, beautiful looking and relaxing. So I got on the phone, made a few phone calls, and we're here at St Ives Lakes, Cambridgeshire, on what has got to be one of the prettiest lakes I've ever sat on, catching beautiful bream. And that is another stunning fish. What a cracking fish. Hold him up for you. Look at that. Beautiful fish. Really dark fish. The water's gin clear here. You can see the bottom probably, I don't know, 7-8 metres out. So the fish have obviously taken on a really dark colour. It did take a while for the first fish. Obviously no keep nets, just put the fish straight back. Beautiful fish. Got to be 4 or 5 pound that fella. Did take a while to get a few bites, but once they've arrived, it's certainly good fishing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cast this back out, and then I'll talk to you about the setup and how I've approached the day, because it's quite interesting talking about traditional style bream fishing rather than method feeders and, you know, small, bigger baits and more commercial fishery style bream fishing. So we'll just cast this back out. Caught that fish on 2 big bits of worm, so I think what we'll do is try the same bait again. Nice big hook, long hook length as you can see. Feel that down. Perfect. So, as always, when I get to a new venue, what I like to do is have a bit of a plumb around with a bomb, just to see what we're faced with. The water here is so clear, you can see weed everywhere. Obviously the weed thrives in clear venues. This is an old gravel pit, really nice picturesque lake, and I don't want to be chucking out without thinking about it and chucking the big bed of weed. So what I've done is that I chuck around with a bomb. I've started at sort of like 30 metres, worked my way out, and to be fair, the area that I'm fishing seems pretty clear. Made it really easy for me. I just plumped on a distance of 50 metres, sticked it up, which is really important. There's some big fish in here, some big tench, big bream. There's also some carp, because it's a specimen carp fishery primarily. If I do hook one of those bigger fish, I'll have to unclip and have to go back to the original spot. So clipping up is really important for me. It also means that if I want to add a couple of metres to my casting distance, maybe just to try off the back of the feed, I can do that and quickly revert back to the original distance. So I've got a reference point. Bait wise, I've got with me a bag of green swim stim. I've mixed it with half a bag of swim stim black. It creates a lovely dark mix, perfect for this clear water. I just feel that fish in clear water just don't like grazing over a bright mix. So something that blends in with the bottom, you know, and this mix ticks all the boxes. I've mixed it to quite a damp consistency, but throughout the day I might just add, got a little tub of water on my side tray, I might just add a bit of water to the mix as the day goes on, just to slop it up a little bit. Talking about bright baits, I've got with me a few soaked up swim stim F1 pellets from 2 mils. They create just a lovely little fleck of colour on the bottom, just something that I think holds some better fish in the peg. I've also got some really traditional bream baits, so worms, some dead maggots, some corn, and I'm going to feed all those baits. Hook bait wise, I think bigger baits in this clear water are going to reign supreme. So something like 2 big bits of worm or a bunch of maggots, I think they're going to be key. Kit wise, I'm using my standard big water bream setup. So I've got a cast and reel that's loaded with 010 braid, quite a nice thin braid. It aids casting, it sinks quickly, and obviously braid for bite detection is unrivaled. Rod wise, I'm using a Free Spirit High S power feeder. This is the special and it's 13 foot. I like the extra length in the rod just to help me cast those longer hook lengths, those longer tails. And if I do need to chuck any distance, I can easily do it with this rod. Hollow tips, I just know that I'm not going to get many crack offs with a hollow tip, and still the bite detection is brilliant with a hollow tip. End rig, I'm using a helicopter style rig. So really simple to tie. A float stop goes on the line, followed by a little quick change swivel. I thread 2 more float stops onto the line, finish with a little loop, and then put my snap link in that loop. That snap link's going to house my feeder. Then I'll just attach the hook length to that little quick change feeder, and I can even move those float stops up and down the line if I want to vary the presentation or vary the drop between the hook length and the feeder. Usually though, for bigger fish, I have the drop quite small. For smaller fish, I'll probably move them float stops up the line and maybe have a 6 to 10 inch drop. But for today, 4 inches about right, I think. It's just so the fish doesn't have a chance to use the weight of the feeder to shake the hook out of its mouth. Hook length is 016 and I've got that tied to a size 12 medium gauge hook. I've also got a selection of feeders to try, so cage feeders and window feeders, all in different sizes. Another classic bream bite, a couple of nods and the tip just flew round then. Let me talk to you about how I've set the swim up, how I started my session. Because as I say, it's taken quite a while for the fish to rock up today. So obviously I don't know much or anything about this lake at all, other than the fact it gets heavily carp fished, and I know that there is some decent bream in here. So for me, it's been a bit of a softly approach, a bit of a suck it and see approach today. Feels like a nice fish, this does. Cool, you can see it coming up a long way out, beautiful, under the surface. So to start the session, I've put a big Nisa feeder on, just wrap round its fin a little bit there. God, beautiful fish. I've put a big Nisa feeder on. And gave it 8 feederfuls of bait, loads of pellets, obviously the ground bait mix, a few dead maggots, not a lot. I was a bit dubious to start with about attracting too many smaller fish into the swim. So micro pellets, ground bait, some corn, you know, some bigger baits. What I don't tend to do is start fishing with feeding worms on this sort of venue. I sort of hold off the worms until later on in the session, or until I need to make a switch, because that switch can be absolutely deadly, just starting to put some worms in. If you put them in from the start, I'm not too sure they'd work as well, but just holding off for a little bit and then putting them in later on can be absolutely deadly, as has proved today. So 8 feederfuls of bait goes in. I mean, look at this for a fish. Beautiful fish. You can't knock fish like that. Cracking. And then I've settled into sort of a routine of casting every 6 or 7 minutes. Obviously I've got the stopwatch here. Every 6 or 7 minutes, cast out. Obviously a smaller feeder for fishing with. A 5 square Nisa was the one that I started on, just to get a little bit more bait into the swim. And I tell you what, an hour and a half in, I've still not had a bite, not a liner, nothing. I'm beginning to think I've made a massive mistake coming here. But I've got the worms on the sub bench, started to chop a few worms up, introducing a few worms. 15 minutes later, the tip's toe round, I'm attached to my first fish. Feeding those worms has been absolutely brilliant. It's really changed my day. So it just shows you need to have all your bases covered I'm still putting a lot of pellet into the swim because I think that's going to act as a brilliant holding bait. But I'm feeding a good blob of worms now. I've gone down in feeder size as well, because now I feel there's a few fish around. I want to catch them rather than sort of feed them. So I've gone down in feeder size. And that switch to a smaller feeder has definitely helped. So as soon as the feeder's on the bottom, I don't like to move the feeder at all, so it's a case of gently pulling it back onto the rest, just tightening the tip. Obviously with braid, everything's so direct, so you see your bites as soon as the fish picks up the bait. Another thing that I feel has helped is just dampening my mix up a little bit. Obviously with the water being so clear, just adding a bit of cloud in the water I think has helped massively. So just adding a bit of water to the ground bait, just in a little pile, ready for my next feeder full. While that feeder's out there, I'm giving it a little blob of worm in my ground bait bowl, a few pellets, mixing it together, and that's my little parcel of bait for my next feeder full. Just means I'm not messing around then in between fish. I mean, the fishing now is absolutely brilliant. This is definitely a bigger fish. I think this is the biggest fish of the day so far. Cracking fish. Cool. I've never had a double figure bream, and this isn't double figures by any stretch, but there's a chance today. And I'll tell you what, these fish are getting bigger every single cast. That is a brilliant fish in anyone's book. Maybe £7 maybe. Losing a bit of a chunk of its tail there, look. Cracking fish. Great watching them swim back as well in the clear water. Come on, mate. Come on, mate. Back to your friends. So I'm chucking 50 metres today. I'm using a shock leader. And to be fair, if I'm casting any distance, probably even over 40 metres now, I'll always use a shock leader. It just means you're cutting down the risks of obviously cracking off on the cast, but also your end rig remains a bit more tangle free because obviously the line's a little bit stiffer. If I was to use maybe braid straight through or a lighter main line straight through, there is the scope for a few tangles, and obviously you don't want to be sitting there with your rig tangled. So again, we've hit the clip, it's hit the bottom, just ease the rod back. Now, tying the shock leader and join it to the braid. When I'm fishing for bream, fish that aren't fighting, you know, they don't exactly fight really hard like carp would, I use a bit of a shorter shock leader. So today, I've gone up and down the rod. About 25 feet of shock leader is what I've used today. Obviously it's a 13-foot rod. Now if I was carp fishing, I'd use probably 35 feet, just so when I was playing a fish at my net, I've got a couple of turns of shock leader on the reel. I've not got my shock leader knot out, which is obviously a weak point. Now, tying the shock leader to the braid. There's loads of different ways of doing it. My way is a little bit fiddly, a little bit time consuming, but I think it creates a really nice, neat little knot. I use a 4-turn water knot. Now, that entails pulling all of the shock leader off of the spool. So 25 feet of shock leader gets pulled off the spool, and then I tie a 4-turn water knot. Again, really fiddly. You have to pull all of the shock leader through the loop that you formed. There'll be a detailed description somewhere on the web of how to tie this knot, but it's a 4-turn water knot. Pull it all the way through, pull it tight, and you'll get a really nice, neat, single, tiny knot. Trim those tags as close as you can get them to the knot, and you'll get a knot that sits on your reel perfectly. It goes through the eyes of your rod perfectly, causes no problems, and it's plenty strong enough for obviously the fish we're catching today. So I've had 4 or 5 beautiful fish. Now, obviously the sun's getting pretty high at the minute. I think those fish are sitting really high in the water because every single bite comes within 30 seconds of the feeder hitting the bottom. Obviously those fish must be sitting high, and then they're dipping down, following that feeder down, picking up my hook bait, and obviously I'm getting a bite. So, things have gone a little bit quiet now. Made a little bit of a change. I've got slightly longer hook length on. I was fishing a 60 centimetre hook length. I'm now on a metre long hook length. And instead of ramming my feeder full of particles, there we go, nice, right on cue. Instead of ramming my feeder full of particles, which I feel was giving the fish, that 1 or 2 fish that was dipping down following my feeder down, probably giving that fish a little bit too much choice. I want that fish to just pick up my hook bait, so I've cut the particles out just for a few casts, just to see what happens. And I'm going with neat ground bait, so just ground bait in the feeder, nothing else. And obviously if that fish does follow that feeder down looking for a meal, it's only got one choice, and that's my hook bait, and it looks like it's worked. I don't think it's as big as a couple of the really nice big boys that we've had, but it's a fish. Nice fish too. There is some tension in this lake, so it'd be nice to maybe catch a couple of those. But I'm not complaining, catching one of these every chuck. The very important thing I've done as well is I've switched sort of 5 maggots on the hook. I'm just thinking bigger baits in this clearer water have got to work. And whereas I was catching a lot of fish early on worms, I just feel that maggots are a great bait when you're trying to catch a fish sort of on the drop or just as the bait's settled. Not as big as the other fish, but cracking fish. Let's hold him up for you. He's a little bit lively. Beautiful fish, probably 3.5, 4 pound. So we'll see if that works again. Obviously a lot of people, when you talk about feeder fishing, a lot of people just see it as a chuck it out and hope sort of method, but there's a lot of logic to it. And a lot of the time, obviously because you're feeder fishing, you're faced with fishing on the bottom only. But a lot of the time those fish are sitting high up in the water, and you still need to be able to catch those fish. So that's where the long tail and slightly smaller feeder comes in. Not putting a lot of pressure on the feeder either, on the ground bait when I'm loading the feeder, so just nipping it in. Using a 28 gram Nisa rocket. Don't want it to make too much noise on the surface, so 28 grams getting me there nicely. Can tighten up to it pretty nicely as well. Ground bait consistency is pretty damp. Just adding a little bit of water to the ground bait for each chuck, just so it creates a nice little cloud. I'm sure in this clear water the cloud's got to make a difference. It's noticeable as well that I haven't as yet had a fish straight after catching a fish, and again with that clear water, those bream flashing down there, it's got to maybe spook the rest of them and just scatter them for a bit. Having said that, indication straight away. So maybe they're just settling down a little bit. This change to neat ground bait in the feeder has definitely, obviously sparked something. All my maggots have gone. Always feel when you get a sharp jab like that, you've got to reel in, because your bait's done, or at least if it was a big fish, you've probably spooked it. So if I get a big sharp jab on the quiver tip, it's time for me to reel in usually. I've got to admit, earlier on, obviously 6 or 7 weeks without fishing because of our lockdown, my casting was pretty ropey, well, by my standards anyway, but it's pretty dialed in now. We're on the spot every single time. We've got a lovely little yellow bush to aim at. I reckon out there it's about 10 or 12 foot deep. And the trouble is, obviously, those fish could be sitting 3 foot deep. It's a lovely sunny day. They might just be sunning themselves 3 foot deep. They know there's some bait there, but they're not really that keen on going down and feeding on it. They'll probably wait till tonight to have a proper go. So it's just a case of maybe just catching the odd fish that is willing to have a go. The odd fish that just dips down every now and again, follows the feeder down. It's a beautiful place. Have a look on the Facebook page, St Ives Fishery, Cambridge. See if we can get another bite pretty quick. As I say, I'm always wary when you hook a fish in this clear water that it's going to spook the rest of the shoal pretty easily. I don't think they go very far, especially when they're hungry. If we don't get one, maybe this chuck or the next chuck, we'll probably change something again, maybe start adding a few more pellets to the mix. But this neat ground bait's definitely doing the trick. Tell you what we could do, we could switch to a window feeder. That's what we'll do on maybe the next cast, we'll switch to a window feeder. See if that makes a difference. Quite often where you've got only a small amount of bait coming off the feeder, which a window feeder is perfect for, you can ram the bait in. Just a small amount of bait comes off on the cast. And the fish has just literally got no choice then to other than to pick up your hook bait. So I've switched to a window feeder. That was my first cast on a window feeder. The plan is, or my theory is, I think these fish are sitting high up in the water. They're not interested in feeding. Obviously, if they were feeding aggressively, they'd be down on the bottom, eating my loose feed. They're not there at the minute. So the plan is to just try and nick the odd fish during, obviously it's the middle of the day now, so it's not the best part of the day for bream fishing. So I just want to try and nick the odd fish. Now I believe that there's enough bait on the bottom there to hold some fish. Just got to get my hook bait falling through the water to maybe catch one's eye as it falls through the water. So switch to a window feeder, cramming the bait in quite hard. I don't want any of the bait to come out really until it gets to the bottom. I just want my hook bait to be the only piece of food that a nice big bream sees if he follows that feeder down. I'm going to do this maybe for 2 or 3 casts. I'm hoping that bites come pretty quickly. So I'm going to probably give this a couple of casts, 2 or 3 casts at like 2 minutes. 2 minutes a time. See if I can catch 1 or 2 maybe on the drop, or just as the bait settles. And then, if that doesn't work, I think I might go out with the big cage again and start attacking the swim, maybe put a bit more cloud in the peg with a really damp ground bait mix, see if I can pull some fish in. If I don't catch doing this now, that tells me that the fish have probably drifted off a little bit. And I'll probably need to pull them back. So hopefully this works. Just switch back to a couple of bits of worm. I've tried maggots. Just switch back to a couple of bits of worm. Just rule everything out before I make a big change. But it's just interesting, even though you're feeder fishing, you can still change loads of different things as you're fishing during the day. You've still got to be active. You can't just chuck it out and sit back and relax. Especially this time of year when the weather's a little bit warmer. Fish are active, you've got to think on your feet a little bit more. They're really nice fish when you get them, but they're not that easy to catch. We've had a really good spell on them, but I'll tell you what now, they've definitely drifted off. Really good benefit of using the stopwatch as well is when you're fishing in this sort of regimented way and you're making a decision, like I am at the minute, 2 minute cast, just coming up to 2 minutes now. You can rely on the stopwatch, it tells you exactly what to do. Have another cast out. I think I'll make this my last cast on the window and then we'll put a bit more bait in, see if we can pull some fish back into the swim. They cast so nice, window feeders do. Like a bullet. Obviously they're so streamlined. If you're struggling to chuck any distance, get a window feeder on. It makes life so easy. So obviously when we're fishing this way, we want to make sure that we can spot bites pretty quickly. So I'm making sure that I'm tight to the feeder all the time. I don't want to move it too much because there is a bit of blanket weed on the bottom. So I don't want to pull my hook bait into that, but just making sure that my tip's got a little bit of a bend in it so I can see any little indication as the line's sinking. Forgot the stopwatch. So we'll give this 2 minutes on the stopwatch and then we'll have another rethink. So then folks, the plan is 2 feederfuls with the cage. I'm going to empty them out quite high up in the water and then I'm going to follow it in with the window. So again, quite a sloppy mix in the cage. plan is I'm getting some attraction there, just neat ground bait, nothing else. I'm getting some attraction there, I'm pulling hopefully a few fish back into the swim. So I'm not even letting those hit the bottom. I'm emptying them out sort of like half depth, load of cloud in the swim. And then the plan is, put the window back on. Change the hook bait. Just put some maggots on there just so I didn't get a tangle when I was casting out. If you just cast out a loose hook length, you can sometimes get a tangle. Let's change the hook bait. Worm's been brilliant today. Window back on. Put the bait quite hard in the window. Again, we don't want a cloud to come off on this cast. I want to get our hook bait and the feeder to the bottom. So hopefully we've gathered a few fish there by putting a bit of cloud in the water. Now we're hopefully going to catch one. Bang on. Let's see if the plan works. Set the stopwatch. I'm thinking a 4-minute chuck, this chuck. I never thought it would go round again. We tried loads of things, we tried topping it up with a bit of bait, chucking the window feeder over the top of it. None of them got me a bite, and as you can see, time's getting on now. The shadows are getting a little bit longer. We've got to go, and this is actually my last chuck. And what I've done is I've added 3 metres of line, so I've took 3 metres off the line clip and chucked just past my swim. But because a lot of the fishers seem to be taking it, the fish that I've caught, taking it straight away, and I think because it's so still, so hot, all those fish are up in the water, I've put on a really long tail. So I've put a 5-foot tail on, just so the bait falls for a little bit longer. Hopefully catches the fish's eye a little bit easier. I've taken that window feeder off and just put a cage back on. Like I say, cast it just past my swim. And we've had our first fish for what seems like an eternity. Try not to poke it off with the net. There we go. And I think that is a cracking way to end the session. Beautiful fish, probably about 4 or 5 pounds, something like that. Cracking fish. Till next time, folks, tight lines.